Tez, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Elena. I'm really glad to be here.
So, the first question I ask my guests is, give my audience a little bit of an insight in terms of what is your career story and, get us up to speed to what you're doing today.
I am a social entrepreneur and an endurance artist. And those are two, one title you've surely heard of, one probably not because I made it up. The the theme of my career has really been how do I use business as a force for good? And so coming out of college, that inspired me to found a couple of nonprofits. One where I did medical education in Latin America, helped set up Bolivia and Venezuela's first and only university-based EMT training programs. And along the way was also becoming an endurance athlete. I was going through depression in college and found that a bit of exercise helped me feel better. Lo and behold, the longer the race, the better I did, and kept following that passion. Fast forward some years, I'm doing my MBA in London and looking to level up my skills in business to use that as a force for good. And that leads me into some of the work that I'm doing now. I did some years of consulting with Deloitte and started another nonprofit to raise funds in action for ocean conservation while sharing the story of long distance extreme expeditions on the ocean, which we can get into in a bit. But it's really social impact, tying together sports, storytelling, and purpose.
That's amazing. And yes, I'm very excited to hear about your journey from California to Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken, right? Was that the journey?
That's right. In 2020, I became the first person in history to row from California to Hawaii solo and self supported without any previous experience, which isn't something I recommend. Definitely training is helpful, but I wasn't a rower and I wasn't a sailor. And everybody else who had completed that route, just a handful of people, had all previously rowed an ocean.
Super interesting. And before we go deeper into that, I want to take our audience back a little bit earlier in your life because I'm always curious when people do things like that and accomplish, some really amazing things and kind of build up that endurance, essentially. Was there anything particular as you were growing up that led you to be super involved in that, or did it come later in college? Like, what was it that got you into these, to become this social entrepreneur?
There were definitely influences when I was a kid, and I'll credit my parents for influencing me and exposing me to things other than just our own self-interest at times. There was one Thanksgiving where I remember my parents had split up and we were with my mom, my older brother, and I were with our mom. And she thought, rather than cook a little meal for the three of us, why don't we go volunteer and serve meals to people who are going in for to a shelter? And as a 9 or 10 year old, that was very impactful. That was actually I don't remember all my Thanksgivings, but I remember that one. And so she kind of planted that seed in volunteering, giving back where you can. At the same time, I grew up in way upstate New York, near Lake Placid, where the Olympics were held in 1980. The nearest neighbor was a 10-minute walk. There wasn't TV. There wasn't even cable laid in the road to the house. And I'm the youngest of three, and my older siblings moved out pretty early, and my parents split up. And so I spent a great deal of time by myself, or as I like to say, with myself. And I also spent a great deal of time outside. And those became influences later on in my life, using my body and using my ability to explore inside myself and the world to then raise funds and help support a better world for all.
Hmm. And then you've discovered that, that the sports really, change the way we think and feel, about everyday life. So what was it that led you to kind of, if you don't mind me asking, to led you to that depression in college, and how did you pull yourself out? What was it about sports that kind of, you know, because you could have gone a completely different way. It's very difficult to get yourself out of that hole of depression once you're in it. So talk to me a little bit about that experience.
When I say sports, it's really endurance sports specifically because they are unique in the sense that look, there's always a team around you and there's always people who are helping you out. But at the end of the day, it teaches some self-reliance and helps you develop your relationship with yourself. And so for me, it was the running, the swimming, the cycling that was really helpful to get into my body and out of my head, because that's part of depression as well. Going over the same cycle of thoughts. And if you can get back into your body and feel good, feel a little bit strong, even, that starts shifting your chemistry and your mindset and all these other things. Now, as far as what caused my malaise, it was a couple of things. One that many people can relate to, a breakup that I wasn't happy about and kind of just left me feeling down for a while. But also, I was living in Minnesota at the time. And as I mentioned, I grew up in New York. And in New York, there is not that much of a living heritage of Native Americans, of American Indians. There aren't that many reservations, and I didn't have really any exposure to American Indian issues. Moved to Minnesota, however, where I was going to college, and suddenly I'm confronted with the fact that the very obvious fact that I'm living on stolen land, that people were forcibly removed. And I was really wrestling with what could I do with the privilege of attending this amazing private liberal arts school and benefiting from this colonialist legacy. And there wasn't an easy answer to that. I started wrestling with it, but in the end, it kind of came again through exploring inside ourselves in the world. What I ended up doing as well is working with a friend of mine, John Lurie, who is a long distance canoeist and a journalist and a community organizer. And we created a program for Native youth, Dakota Lakota youth, from to travel the reverse route of their exile, basically traveling from reservations in South Dakota down to Nebraska, and through their own power on canoes, their traditional means of voyage, begin retracing the route of their exile from their homeland. And so, in a way, here became another kind of example of where I was trying to find a solution, worked with some people who knew what we could do, and created an experiential education program anchored in culturally relevant sports and tradition to help other communities. And through that process, I felt better myself.
Mhm. That's amazing, and I think it probably also goes back to kind of again, I think maybe that Thanksgiving dinner where your mom just kind of exposed you to that, so you became more aware and empathetic to the experiences of others. So I think it's very unique, and the reason I'm focused on that is because I just find it super interesting about how our earlier experiences truly shape us to who we are later in life, even though there's like a big almost gap in between when something happens and when we realize where the influence is coming from. And it's almost like a lot of times we don't even pay attention. So I always find it interesting because a lot of times, again, and now I'm just going to sound like a psychologist, but a lot of things that are developed in us has something to do going back to our childhood, and I think it's pretty
Absolutely.
interesting. So back to kind of your story. So you found endurance sports, and that really kind of helped you get out of feeling down, and you started giving back. And then later on in life, after you've gone on through some corporate experience, and then in 2020, what has prompted you to want to row by yourself, and that whole journey?
Yeah, the $1 million question. Why would anyone in their right mind climb inside of a rowboat and row out to the sea by themselves? You're right to want to analyze that question, by the way. I totally understand that. um, so the story here actually again ties to mental health in a way, but not my own. So in 2015, I moved to London to get my MBA, kind of upskill in terms of social impact. While I was a student there, I was continuing to race and do endurance sports, and life felt pretty good. And then suddenly, in 2016, overnight, everything changed. My father, who I loved dearly, suddenly died, and he actually took his life. And in the aftermath of that, a couple of things happened. One, I felt like I just wanted to get away from everything. I was upset and disappointed by him and the world and wanted space to reflect and just space to myself. But at the same time, I also came across this thing called ocean rowing. The world works in mysterious ways. So I saw a film about a woman who'd rowed and cycled around the world, and it really spoke to me. I knew in that moment, this was just a few months after my dad died, I knew that I would row across an ocean and do it alone. And I trusted that I would find a way to use this journey, not just as a means of my own healing, but create an offering for the world. And so from there, created this whole campaign, the United World Challenge brand. I called it United World Challenge because I decided to use the campaign to raise scholarships for schools called United World Colleges. Now, I was lucky enough to get one of these scholarships when I was 17, moved to Northern Italy, where I studied for 2 years alongside 200 students from 85 countries, all of us on full scholarships. You can imagine what that's like as a high school experience. Really, really, really transformative. So from when I graduated from that program in Italy, I always wanted to pay that scholarship experience forward to new students. And when I decided, hey, I can row across an ocean, maybe I can share the story, help inspire other people to find their ocean and the courage to cross it, and use the journey to raise scholarship funds and pay forward this experience to other students. So that was the idea in 2016. It took 3.5 years from when I got the idea till when I got in my boat and started rowing, which was a whole other journey just to get to
Mm.
the start line. But that was kind of the genesis of the United World Challenge.
Okay, that's very cool. Um, I see this theme about you, which is like all about giving back, which is phenomenal. And it's interesting from kind of what you're saying is that a lot of that came from that self-reflection and spending time with yourself. But that's kind of where I just see that there's a connection, exploring within yourself and then kind of being empathetic to others and then creating these opportunities for other people. And I think it's so, literally, I'm just thinking about this now. And I think this is kind of where the magic is at, because we spend so much time just busy, busy, busy running around. We don't have a chance to reflect, on just anything around us. So I think the fact that you spend that time with yourself probably helps you with being more empathetic, because it all starts with us. Like, you know what I mean? So anyway, that's an I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of that, but let me get away from that for a moment. So I remember when we first chatted, like several weeks ago, and I said it must have been. I think I've asked you that, or maybe it was a statement. I said it must have been pretty lonely when you were going
Hmm.
across the ocean, and then you said that's the last thing that you thought about.
That's right. Yeah. And it's a common expectation. We commonly associate solitude with loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
associate them so much to the extent that we confound them and think they're one and the same. Now, there are many times in this project where I felt lonely. I felt lonely when I was in a coffee shop working, hustling to raise the funds to buy the boat and fund this expedition. Lonely when I was in the gym by myself or doing all these different things, basically saying no to all these other experiences so I could focus on this one. That's when I felt lonely. But while I was on the ocean, I didn't feel lonely at all. Now, there were times it was very hard and I wished I had a teammate. I'll be honest about that.
Yeah.
But that's a bit different than loneliness. And for me, I think the reason I didn't feel lonely while I was on the water, and why I'm not likely to feel lonely if I'm going on a hike in the woods in Colorado where I live now, is because loneliness isn't something you cure by being around other people. It's something you cure by spending quality time with whomever you're with. And often that can be yourself. So when I say when you want to address the cause of loneliness, it's investing in quality time with yourself. Now, quality time could mean a whole bunch of different things. For me, it's using my body to explore the world, explore myself, and use it to raise funds and action for others, make a difference. If as long as I'm doing that and it's quality time and I can be kind to myself in that process, which is a lot, sometimes it's hard, then loneliness isn't often something I'd experience.
Okay, that's interesting. And so, to piggyback off of that, what have been some of the biggest lessons, I guess, that you've learned about yourself in this time with yourself?
One is to be patient and kind. As an entrepreneur, I want something done right away. I get an idea and I start chasing it, and sometimes these things take a really long time.
Mm,
And so from there, you have two conclusions. One is be kind to yourself, right? If you're beating yourself up, judging yourself for whatever it might be, not only does it make the experience awful, but it actually doesn't help you do a better job. When I
mm-hmm,
was on the ocean, my rowing seat broke. And that's kind of a disaster in the middle of the ocean. Rowing seat needs to move, it needs to roll to get the leverage from your legs and your back to make an efficient rowing stroke. I did about 1 million strokes in my 71 days across the Pacific Ocean. And when the seat broke it was actually on day 15, started making repairs and was just absolutely paralyzed by fear and judging myself for not being well enough equipped to respond to this and so many other things. And in that state, while I was trying to make repairs to the seat, I came up with terrible ideas, absolutely terrible solutions because of all the pressure I put on myself. Well, after 30 days, I finally came up with a solution that worked. and I took plastic and I melted it in my camp stove and I remade bearings in my hand to replace bearings in the wheels that were grinding to dust because of the kind of cascade of issues that happened as a result of a first bolt breaking. Now, I got to that solution not because I was judging myself or chastising myself or putting so much pressure on, but because I relaxed into solving the problem. And so the one thing there is be kind to yourself, relax, give yourself space, try and make problem solving fun, and it'll be a lot more effective. But then two is give it time. Great things take hustle. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Good things take hustle. Great things take time.
Mhm.
Great things take time. And it's because of compound change, right? So those little habits, those little decisions every day, we don't see them adding up. And we think in our head that they'll add up linearly, but they actually add up exponentially. They compound,
Mm.
right? That's where the 3.5 years of prep on this project. And for the first 2.5, it didn't feel like I made any progress. And then all of a sudden, you're hitting all these wins. And you see that across all these different areas in life. So those two lessons, be kind to yourself and think long term, appreciate the role of compound change in our decision making and our habits and how we show up. And together, those two things will get you pretty far.
Mm. Yeah, I work in tech, and I find this a lot with analytical people that tend to be so harsh on themselves, and sometimes just being
Mhm.
paralyzed by, all the, trying to make everything perfect. And to your point, it's just kind of letting go sometime and just not being so harsh on yourself, remembering that you're just a human being. And I can only imagine, I mean, I can't even imagine. I have goosebumps when you're telling me about this, and I'm like, day 15, something breaks that is essential. Literally, I got goosebumps because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I would do. So just the mental ability to sustain that kind of stressor, like to my mind, and probably people that are listening, it's like, what? Like, how does that, like, what are you supposed to do? But I guess when you're in it, I would imagine that once you're in it, you don't really have a choice. So you just get through it. Like you just, problem solve, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. There isn't a choice, but we'll try and come up with them. I certainly tried to come up with all sorts of ways to back out of the row once I'd begun. I was so far out of my comfort zone.
Mhm.
On day three, wind and weather picked up and things were so rough I couldn't control the boat. And I had only 3 days of training because my whole training program was completely eliminated by COVID and lockdowns and shutdowns in spring
Mm.
2020. So I had 3 days, got in my boat, and this was the last weather window I would have for the season. Set out, and on day three, conditions pick up so much that I'm just in over my head. And I start trying to come up with any reason to go back to shore and save face. And that continued when the rowing seat broke. So there are these ideas that'll come up. Our egos feeling unsafe, and I'll try and find safety somewhere.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's not to say that I didn't have my breakdowns. I didn't scream and cry and have those moments on the ocean. But one of the beautiful things about it is it's long enough that you can have that whole process, come through it on the other side. And guess what? You're still here tomorrow. So you better start rowing one way or another.
Hmm. And so, what kept you going in those times when it was so, tempting to turn back?
A couple things. One was giving myself permission to quit. I told myself I can quit, but not today.
Hmm.
What do I need to do today? I just need to make it a good day. Now it felt like I wasn't going anywhere. There's no landmarks to show progress. The water all looks the same. And kind of got in my head a lot, feeling like I'm going nowhere. I'm never going to make it. And I said, well, maybe I won't make it. So what? But I spent 3.5 years getting here. Why don't I just enjoy today? Not even measure how many miles I go or don't go. Just enjoy it. And to enjoy it, it helped me to look around and find the beauty around me. It could be the bit of turquoise at the top of a curling wave. It could be a bird. It could be just the reflections in the water. Anything that would help me get present to the moment, come back to the beauty, and feel grateful that I'm lucky to be here. And I think that's a helpful thing for me to remember, at least in my day to day. I'm on the computer, I'm having meetings. If we're able to come back and find the beauty around us, I think if we look for it, we'll find it. And that really helps.
Mm, absolutely. What did you bring with you besides like the essentials like food and, water and etc.? Was there anything
Mm.
that you like must bring with you?
Well, I brought a Wilson ball from Castaway, but I would not say Wilson was an essential. He really didn't say very much, more like a prop.
Mm,
I brought a lot of video equipment. So I
mhm,
shot a bunch of video and photo while I'm out there. Even though I'm physically isolated, there's no support boat, there's no one around. I didn't see anyone for 71 days. I am digitally connected and I'm sending back photos and videos and blogs and using that. My team back on land is posting it onto socials, and they were using that to raise the scholarship funds that we raised in total 77 grand for students to attend United World Colleges. So a lot of media equipment. I bring some research and scientific equipment to gather data on ocean health. Um, and then, of course, food, toiletries, anything I might need in that time, I need to bring because there's absolutely no resupply.
mm. How did you prepare for it from a physical and mental standpoint? Like, what was your routine like to prepare for it?
Physical preparation is actually fairly straightforward. Time in the gym, effectively. And it's not really time on the rowing machine. That doesn't translate very well. They're very linear. And on the ocean with the waves and the rocking of the boat, there's a lot more rotational and stabilizer muscles that are required. So time in the gym and dynamic fitness and strength building, that's fairly straightforward. At the end of the day, everybody gets tired. It's what happens when you get tired. Doesn't matter how strong you are, how good shape you are when you get in that boat. And I was in great shape when I got in. It wasn't my muscles that made me want to turn around on day three, you know? Uh, and so the mental preparation, every day is an opportunity for that. When I have a meeting that doesn't go to plan, when I feel disappointed by an outcome and I realize I was attached to a certain thing and I feel let down, all of those are opportunities to reflect and just know myself better. Because ultimately, those same disillusionments, those same disappointments and reactions are the same kinds of things that would sabotage my crossing. So every day is an opportunity for that and to just practice moment to moment reflection, and then, of course, additional things like meditation and retreats and therapy and those kinds of things are all really helpful too.
Hmm. What do you feel you learned about yourself? Like, what was the biggest lesson you think? Besides, like, the be
It's
kind,
funny.
but like about you, like about yourself particularly.
Mhm. Gosh, I hesitate to answer because there's so many different things, and they're also really hard to articulate.
Mm,
You know, I think one thing that happened after I was out there just for a couple of weeks is I felt my tolerance for bullshit just completely disappear. The ocean is so real. There's no hiding from anything out there, from myself or the elements or anything. I have a cabin I can sneak into to, sleep, but effectively I'm fully exposed. What that meant is anything that didn't feel real in terms of relating to another person, in terms of work, in terms of anything, I just had no tolerance for it. And so that's something that's carried over coming back to land, is to basically just bring me more into integrity, alignment, authenticity, and moment to moment, and the kind of work that I seek out.
mm. That's I think that's powerful on its own. So yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, once you're out there, you're probably just like anything that you deal with on land. You're probably just like I'm not even bothered. Like I don't even have time for it. It's too much a waste of a time. Like that experience alone is just you have to experience that. On some level, I mean, I think you went the extreme experience for sure, but it's and the reason I bring this up is because a lot of people now there's a lot of talk about resilience building and and kind of being mindful, but I feel like if you don't experience certain experiences that lead you to build up that resilience to bullshit, your
Hmm.
tolerance to bullshit, like at the end of the day it's really hard to practice that. Like you have to really be exposed to certain, I don't know, like an event, a challenge, etc., that will truly reset you. I don't know if it's something, and this is what I battle with, and I'm curious because you've had your share of resilience building real life experiences that are quite intense, to build up that resilience. Do you think that people can build up that resilience without experiencing kind of extreme situations, whether they are, your journey, like similar to something that you've done, that endurance, or the health challenges? Like, I'm genuinely just asking.
Yeah. Setbacks are definitely a necessary component to developing resilience. There needs to be some stressor that helps you develop that skill. Now, extremity and stress is relative. So it all comes down to what your baseline is. That said, the important thing is to get a little bit out of the comfort zone. Comfort is a drug. Comfort is a drug, and we seek it in so many different parts of our life. And sometimes drugs are important. You have an infection, you take a drug, you take an antibiotic. If your nervous system is so stressed out that you need comfort, listen to that. When I came back to land, integrating was so hard, I desperately needed comfort. So there's a time for that. But if one's lifestyle is designed completely to insulate ourselves from discomfort, then when inevitably discomfort comes in, we'll be totally ill-equipped for it. And so I think it's actively seeking out the areas in our life where we wish to stress ourselves. And for some people that might be work, for some people it might be exercise. There's so many different ways to do that, but we need to seek out ways to grow. I mean, if you look at what the growth equation is, this is one of my favorite books. Is There's a few by, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the author's names. One is Do Hard Things,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is Peak Performance. I'm looking, I might, boom, I have it right here. I need to get in touch with these guys.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get the
Peak and blur. Yeah. Yep.
the filter.
What are the
It's
who's the
Peak
authors?
Performance,
Yeah.
Brad Stulberg and Steve Magnus. See if I
Nice.
can get it to show up.
It's we saw it a
Wow,
little. It's okay. I'll put a
Zoom is
link to
smarter
it.
than we think. So in that book, in all their work, right, they look at the growth equation. Stress plus rest equals growth.
Mm,
If all we're doing is resting, well, we're not going to grow. If all we're doing is stressing ourselves out, we're not going to grow. You need to have that downtime. And that works both mentally, emotionally, and physically. Physically, there are a lot of endurance athletes and others who know the stress part. They train
mhm,
really hard, but they don't sleep.
mm.
So I'm kind of going in a tangent. This is an area I'm very passionate about, but we need to be intentional about what areas in our life we wish to experience a degree of discomfort, and that is how we grow.
Mm. Well, this is we're very much in tune with that because the whole purpose of the podcast is helping people getting out of their comfort zone. Because I very much believe this exactly what you're saying, that you have to put yourself in certain situations like it's a good thing. I always look at it like
And
mindset. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
well, I would just say that it's also going to have you don't even always need to seek it out. It's as much a question of how we respond when life inevitably puts that in our plate. you
Mm,
know like when I was out in the ocean, I was so frustrated my rowing seat broke. It was as though the broken rowing seat was in the way of the hard experience I was looking for. I was
mm,
like, oh, the challenge was to row across the ocean, and now I have to fix this damn seat every day for 30 days. And I realized,
mm,
oh my gosh, like the seat is the challenge if I'm willing to show up for it. Right. So it's also orienting ourselves effectively to the challenges we face and embracing that as the setback and as an opportunity for growth, instead of rejecting it because it's not the specific challenge you wanted. If it's uncomfortable, the natural response is to try and shoo it away, and the hard response is to embrace it. But if you can embrace it, that's where some of the magic is.
mm. Absolutely. I'll ask you one more question about your row experience, and then we're going to move on to something else. I'm just so interested in it, but I am also
Of
mindful
course.
to ask you about other things. But how did you feel when you reached land? What were some feelings, maybe challenges you've experienced? You said it kind of took you a while to adjust back.
It took me about a year to feel normal,
Oh,
which
tell me
is
more.
longer than I expected. Longer than I expected. It was a mix of things. I kind of felt like a wave washed ashore,
Mm,
kind of disoriented and a bit just lost. And that's fairly normal from an expedition. I talked to other explorers, and after you come back, there's some post expedition blues. You start looking for that next thing. But really, the challenge for me was I went 71 days without seeing another person. At times, the people nearest to me were in the International Space Station in outer space. And yet, while I was out there every day, I saw plastic. And it was heartbreaking to be watching whales and sharks and beautiful wildlife and also plastic everywhere. Some things are big solid objects, but a lot of it is more like a plastic soup or a smog. Just like air pollution, you can't actually see the particulate matter, but it blocks your view. Same thing happens in the ocean. And I came back to land, and again, I faced this lesson of being kind to myself, because I thought, gosh, here I am. I saw it. I saw it firsthand. And with the campaign, My backers, we funded the collection of 5,000 pounds of ocean plastic. I was giving out these water bottles, ocean bottles, to my campaign backers and donors, and using a portion of that proceeds to fund plastic collection in rivers in Indonesia. Now we funded the collection of 5,000 pounds of ocean plastic, but here's the thing: all that work buys us 3 minutes of time,
Mm.
because every 60 seconds, a dump truck worth of plastic that weighs approximately 1,000 pounds flows into the ocean by way of waterways around the world. So all of this work bought us 3 minutes on a global level. So I come back to land and I feel like, well, I saw the issues firsthand. I want to do something. And I also feel kind of disempowered at the moment. And I was so worn out mentally and physically and emotionally that I just needed rest. I had done the stress. I needed rest. And so it took me about a year to really complete that rest, come around to perspective, and figure out what I can do to help be a part of the solutions here. Um, but yeah, basically, when you go through any big experience, whatever that stress is, you need the rest component and give that ample time so that you can actually take a meaningful step afterwards.
Mm. To your point about that pollution, I'm sure you hear a lot of people say, "Well, I'm just one person, like, do I really need to kind of do some things if not all of us are doing it?" So, what do you say to somebody who doesn't feel like they can make a difference?
I understand what they mean because it can feel really difficult and you don't always see those results yourself. What I will say is figure out the levers where you have the biggest impact. Your own decisions matter for sure, but they are small in the grand scheme. The biggest levers are on fishing. The largest contributor of ocean plastic is actually discarded fishing gear. So these ghost nets that float through the ocean and then eventually one day land on coral reefs and completely destroy them. They represent the vast majority of ocean plastic by weight. And so choosing where we get our seafood, if we choose to eat it really wisely, is one of the biggest levers. And in a direct way reduces the amount of ocean plastic there is. Second is if you have a lever like a business that you run or know people who run businesses, guide them to ask themselves where plastic is needed and where it's not. And if they choose to use plastic in their products, source social plastic. There's plastic that's been collected and upcycled and is available. It's not virgin plastic that is part of the supply chain that pulls it from the environment and brings it back into circulation. Um, Companies that do this well are able to charge a premium and use that premium to then fund further efforts.
Mm.
Some of the fastest growing product companies are actually doing this, and some of those are sponsors that I work with. So there are levers. Look around for them, and also connect with local leaders to make a difference in the community to figure out what are some of these collection and processing solutions that can happen at the local level.
And if you have some links you want me to share in the post show notes, like, I'll be happy to kind of spread the wording, because I think sometimes we just don't know what we can do as individuals, right? So I'll be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
I
Thank
want to
you.
shift gears just a little bit. I see you as such a prime example of somebody who has built such a strong mindset, because not only that you've experienced loss in the family and use that to create some good out of that, like, it kind of pushed you to go on this expedition, but then also you had a health situation that you had to manage through. And I think that's super fascinating, and maybe that's the wrong word, but I think what's powerful about that experience is what you did afterwards. So I want you to I've read your story in terms of where you were and then what you did afterwards. So I want you to share with us kind of what happened, if you don't mind, and then how you
Of
pulled
course.
yourself out and how you managed to then do what you did after. I don't want to give it away, so you share.
Of course. No, I appreciate the opportunity. So I've been planning my next expedition and had intended to be on the water right now. I thought I was going to announce the expedition in August of 2022, begin it in December of 2022. And I can't say what that is right now. But it just before I was about to announce the expedition, something totally unexpected happened. As you can imagine, as a professional athlete, take good care of my health. I exercise, I rest, I have a whole supplement regime. I'm in great shape. And sometimes life has other plans. On July 13th, had a very normal day, worked out, ran meetings, ran some errands, then walking up a set of stairs, I suddenly got very severe and intense chest pain. And within a couple of minutes, I realized I was having a heart attack. Went to the hospital, and I was. Spent 48 hours in the ICU in advanced cardiac care and was discharged. This was 1 month before my 35th birthday. Discharged, the doctor told me, this will be the hardest thing you've ever done, harder than rowing across an ocean. And he was referring to the recovery process, because now my heart was so damaged that if I were to go out and exercise like I did any normal day, I could just die on the spot. My heart would just tear open at the part where it was damaged. So I just had to rest, just rest. And that meant that my normal coping mechanisms and way of processing and experiencing the world was taken away from me. It was really tough. And then 2 weeks later, my mother passed away. So here I was trying to recover from my heart attack, and then began processing my mother's death. So the summer was really, really tough. The good news is, well, there's a lot of good news. I didn't want to hear it at the time, because you kind of have to I had to allow myself to mourn and feel the grief and feel the anger. All of those things are valid and part of the process of recovery from anything. Don't pretend it doesn't suck. Like, you can admit that it sucks, and only by accepting the situation can you begin to change it. Um, After resting for a few months, was able to go to the hospital, do a stress test, passed with flying colors, and my body's recovered very, very well. Probably in part because I was in good shape beforehand. So taking care of my physical health and being part of a community that I can turn to and they can hold space for me if I just need to cry for an hour because I'm so freaking disappointed by what's happened. That was all available. Passed the stress test and decided to take my body out for a test drive. So in December, 5 months after the heart attack, I flew out to Seattle, where I have a dear friend who's an ultra runner, and we made a little route, a 28-mile route, and I ran a marathon, and it went fine. Definitely wasn't a fast marathon, wasn't pretty, but I felt fine. Within 2 days, the soreness was gone. So you might ask, why would someone want to run a marathon 5 months after a heart attack? But I had been running marathons. This was my 14th year in a row. I started in 2009. That was one of the races I did after realizing these endurance sports helped me recover from depression. So from 2009 to this year, I've been keeping the streak alive. And when I had the heart attack, one of my main goals was recover so that I can run a marathon in December. And thankfully was able to do that and have the green light to resume training. And now I'm putting the pieces together for the same expedition I was planning in 2022. I'll announce it in August of 2023 and begin it at the end of this year.
Mm. That's applaudable. It's again goosebumps really as I'm listening to you, because it could have gone so many different ways, but again, your mindset that you've developed, and I guess that resilience muscle that you've developed has, prompted you to go the other way, because we see this, it's difficult, it's so difficult for people. So again, like, was there anything different that was going through your mind, because it's a different experience, right?
Yeah.
Equally as kind of scary and sad and many things, but what was going through your mind at that point? And on top of that, of course, your mother passing, so it's like it's a double, I don't know, a double hammer right there.
Yeah. Yeah. There were a few things that I learned in reflection during the past 6 months. One is open up and accept help. As an endurance athlete, I rely on myself very much. And this was a moment where I needed help. I needed help going grocery shopping. I needed help cooking. I just couldn't, literally walking and talking was too much for me for a while. And so accepting that I need help and accepting people's offer to help me and sharing my feelings, sharing how disappointed I was, all of that helped me move forward. I'm in a men's group. We meet every week for 2.5 hours. And one of the things we say about men's work and really just any emotional inner work is you have to feel it to heal it. Men often aren't in great touch with their feelings. It's something that a lot of men need to work on. And I'm grateful that I have a community around me that helps me feel it so I can heal it. Another thing was focus on the goal. That goal, having that goal to run a marathon in December helped me take those baby steps, right? It helped me get back on my feet. And even though it was a little bit scary at first, because I didn't trust my heart. I didn't know if something might happen again, and we still don't know. Something might happen anytime. That's true for all of us. Having the goal kept me focused on what I could do today. So at first, when I have to turn down social events because I need rest, I would think to myself, I can't go because I have a heart condition. I realized that language doesn't help. I need to tell myself, I can't go because I'm recovering from a heart condition. And focusing on that goal, the recovery, focusing on the marathon, whatever it is, choosing that kind of language really helps. So that was one takeaway. And lastly, invest in positive habits. If I had decided to run a marathon in the start of 2022 and then I have a heart attack, there's no way I would have imagined that I would recover well enough to do it by the end of the year. But I had run 45 marathons before. And so when I started moving and being active again in October and running a little more in November, that was the hard part. When I took the first step for that marathon in December, that was the hard part. But once I'd started, I have done this so many times before that finishing a marathon is literally a habit for me. So it's a question of what habits do you start now so that when you face a setback, recovering is a going through the motions. It's something you've already done. Like I'd never recovered from a heart attack before, but I've run enough marathons. I know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a question of what positive habits do you want to start today, because those compound over time, and that compounding gives you massive leverage when down the road you have a setback.
Hmm. Have you thought about have you spent some time thinking around the fact that this happened in July, right?
Mm,
The heart attack. So
that's
it
right.
happened in July. Does it make you scared sometimes to think that if it was just a few months later, you could have been in the middle of nowhere then when this happened in your new expedition? Do you
Oh,
think?
of
Because
course.
no,
Of course. Yeah. I mean, partially it makes me scared, but I'm also just grateful. I got so
right.
lucky. I wasn't on a hike in the backcountry. I was 10 minutes from the hospital, wasn't in the middle of the ocean. There's so many ways this could have been significantly worse. And yeah, I would be scared to row across an ocean no matter what I do, and with my next expedition coming up, definitely scared. And also I choose to trust that I have a reason to be here. I choose to trust that my body is healed. My doctors have given me the green light. There's no guarantee that something won't happen, but I also am going to live the life that I'm here to live,
Mm.
and choosing trust in my decisions and my path.
Mm. Yeah, and I now realize when I asked that question, I didn't mean to kind of that you're scared to go. It was
Oh,
more of like it was, you know, it like you said, it could have been worse. So the fact that it happened, it could have probably it might have actually prepared you better for your next expedition, because you know what I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't have the counterfactual. We look at an event and we think it's so bad, but we don't know what the alternate event could have been, right?
exactly.
And so that's one of the heuristics we have is we take in an event and we categorize it as good or bad, and we don't actually know because we don't know what the alternate would have been. So it's up to us
Mm.
to find the good in it, find the lessons in it, and grow and move forward.
No, absolutely. I can spend hours on this, but I'm also mindful of your time. Maybe I'll save all my other questions for when you do the next expedition, and hopefully come back and share that with us. A couple of, before I ask you two final questions that I ask all of my guests, where can people connect with you? Where can they, are you going to be posting this on your website somewhere where they can follow the journey, maybe donate to any cause that you're doing?
Thanks, Elena. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. My name's Tez Steinberg, and if you look me up, you'll find me right away. I'm the only endurance artist and keynote speaker named Tez Steinberg. So connect on LinkedIn, and I'll be sharing updates as I get ready for the next expedition. Additionally, while I'm doing that expedition, it'll be again under the United World Challenge brand. So if you follow on social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, United World Challenge, and you can also find me, Tez Steinberg, on those platforms.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes. I failed to ask you one more question, sorry, but you said endurance artist. Why artist?
Identifying as an artist helps me be more kind to myself.
Hmm.
Right. If I was endurance businessman, I would measure everything in these objective black and white criteria. It's a gain or it's a loss. And so identifying as an artist just gives me more latitude to explore and create in a more free way. Additionally, I've just learned to see what I do as an art form. And it's this art form of completing long distance extreme expeditions, sharing the story to raise funds and action for the issues of our time, and to inspire a more courageous world. And art is really about social change. And being someone who wasn't a rower, wasn't a sailor, doing that first expedition, being someone who wasn't an endurance athlete and went on this journey from depression to this elite level of performance, it just shows what's possible. And so by sharing the story, I hope to create social change. And ultimately, for me, that's a form of art.
I love that. So, final two questions. First one is, what is one question that you wish people would ask themselves more often?
I think the world would be a better place with people asking themselves, uh, uh, well, let's see. The question that was coming to mind is, why am I afraid to spend time alone? But I realize that's loaded. That's a very leading question. But maybe I'll reframe that into, what might happen if I spend more time alone?
Mm,
What might happen if I spend more time alone? Because really, I feel that a lot of the conflict in the world is driven by a lack of self-awareness, driven by parts of ourselves that we don't love or parts of ourselves we reject, whether it's war at a global level or a fight between two partners. And spending a little bit more time with ourselves, I think, can be a really powerful way to change the world.
beautiful. And the last question is, if you had a magic wand to make any change in the world, what would that be?
Oh my goodness, that is an impossible question. Let me think. Um, the cause that I'm really most passionate about right now is protecting, preserving, restoring our oceans. Our oceans are incredibly essential to our planet and ourselves. Half of the oxygen on Earth comes from the oceans. We think it's the forest, it's actually the oceans. And the oceans absorb the majority of our excess heat from climate change, the majority of our excess carbon. They are essential to our survival, and they're very damaged. Oceans receive just 1% of global philanthropic giving. And so it's really important we start to stand up, take action for our oceans, because we need them for our future. So for me, the magic wand would be bringing our oceans back to health and helping people everywhere feel connected to the ocean. No matter where you live, we all depend on the ocean.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for making the time to have this chat. It's been brilliant, really. Thank you.
Elena, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.